Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of our Parkitect campaign playthrough series. We are continuing our various playthroughs on stream, and now we're going for Coral Island. This is Coral Caldera is the scenario here. We are given essentially an old volcano that we need to build up to get a certain number of guests. So we need to get 800 park tickets. So that's not guests in the park, that's 800 park tickets overall. So come and go as they like. There's an optional goal at 400, and also by completing them by December year 2. We also have to maintain our park rating of 70%, which should be pretty straightforward. Um, at the 400 guests optional goal, which is optional, but you're going to hit it anyway on the way to 800, we unlock the steel coaster, which I thought we might be able to use for something through there. So we can see the scenario here. We have a nice little lighthouse and kind of dock area that leads into this sort of creepy tunnel here, and into this center space where it's pretty large, pretty flat. Got some lakes and some things like that. So let's jump into the time lapse here as I'm kind of inspecting the lighthouse here just to see how they put it together. The scenario builders, which some pretty cool ideas for how to use pieces and parts for that. But we look at what we've got, and there's a number of coaster and flat ride options to start, and trying to think about theme, and I figured tropical theme is the best way to go about this because it's we're on an island in theoretically the middle of the tropics somewhere. So wanted to start with a couple of different options. I think the first thing is to start with a flat ride and a coaster. We're going to build out everything on pause, and then after that, we're going to come back and uh, then open it up and let the guests come on in. Now, just the reason behind that is really just to spend all the money that we've got and take our time building what we want to build and still try and keep the scenario goal for timeline in play. So looking at a couple different sizes of things, and naturally the first thing seems to be the pirate ship. After all, we are surrounded by ocean, so we're going to stick it over this little tiny lake here, which to me seems like the kind of requisite thing that you do with these kind of rides. So I'm going to put base in here and then also build out these footers so they're not just floating right there. Just a little bit of detail as far as that goes. Now, as far as theming, we'll kind of progressively add some stuff in here. I like this post and rope fencing. It's a nice option. There's kind of limited fencing in vanilla game as far as kind of decorative options. So we're going to start with this and see how it goes. And also build out this little kind of decking walkway along the side here, almost like a boardwalk. I love these little turtle topiaries that started here in the game, so we're going to keep those in place and kind of build our walkway around them. At some point, we need to retheme this creepy tunnel, just because it's a little bit bland, I suppose, for one. So we're looking at this as an option. So like some kind of a wood fort idea, and we achieve things with more or less success as far as that goes. But before we get there, let's build ourselves a custom kids coaster. So we're going to use the mountainside just a little bit here. And part of the goals for this is I wanted to use some diagonal just to make sure that we're keeping things interesting and keeping sort of unique layouts. So I like this lift up through a swooping turn and into this diagonal drop off of the mountainside. And then we have this nice kind of airtime hill up and over top of the station. Now it comes just trying to figure out what happens after that. Part of the challenge that I find in Parkitect is building basically in one direction, as in you start with a station and you go in the direction of travel until you're done, which is not quite the case in RCT. Obviously, it's a little easier to do that in RCT because you've got only a handful of pieces and they're very rigid to the grid. Versus Parkitect, where you've got a ton of different banking angles, you've got different kind of corner amounts and things like that. So I can understand why it's not possible, but it would be nice to be able to do that because I find it really difficult to build in this fashion. But the more you build, the more you're going to get used to it. So we're going to try something just more or less small here. So drop, hill, helix, or I guess like 270 spiral kind of corner thing here. And then try and see what we can do to finish this off. So I'm looking at a couple of different helix type options here using those helixes, the pieces in the game, or just the various corners. So eventually we kind of end up something like this where we've got the twisted airtime hill, although I can't imagine there's a whole lot of airtime at the speed that we're going. For a little while I was trying to squeeze another helix there in the elbow of that corner, which would have been great, but didn't really roll out quite right. So we'll try that again later. There just wasn't enough space for a brake run, and I did want to run 2 trains. So we always want to make sure that if we're going to be realistic about it, we want to make sure that we have a brake run that's as long as the train itself, plus a little longer. So that's what we ended up with here. So we're just barely there to where we want to be, but that works and does just fine. So now we can kind of lay out a plaza here and figure out how we want to put some buildings in. We also need to figure out how to get a queue across and the exit pathway there as well. And then looking at color schemes, just trying a couple of different options here. I think we had some suggestions from the chat as far as some color choices to go from. Kind of ended up with this nice sort of aqua scheme with the sort of salmon colored supports. I like the bridge across with a queue line because it certainly is interesting as far as just shaping goes, but you also create this nice interaction with the track where the first drive dives underneath that queue and then up and over top of the exit. So you got the sort of up and under and over kind of option going on. So we did find that we can get a pathway through into that sort of no man's land space in between the coaster and the brake run. That will prove a little bit problematic later on, but we'll play it as we go. And here we're starting to lay out some buildings. So I like using land texture to lay out the buildings just to get a sense of kind of what needs to be brought in. And also just starting to do some tree planting here. Now there aren't a whole lot of palm trees on the island elsewhere, and granted I am using some expansion pack scenery, which that's okay, I think. But we have the sand texture underneath and some of these bushes, rocks, and a couple of palm trees, which I think is a nice overall look. We're limited on lamp selection, so we're going to use tiki torches because that still feels enough kind of island based that we can go for it. And then I figure, we might as well place a second coaster here while we're at it. So we're going to use the standard wild mouse. So we have used this one a number of times so far in a number of the scenarios. I think this one is number 3 campaign that we have done. But nonetheless, it's a pretty useful one. Here we're just trying to get rid of the supports in the middle. Just to clean it up a little bit, make it a little less obvious or a little less dense, I suppose, as far as all of that goes. And then we'll put a queue in here and continue to expand our pathway. We don't want to do too much path right away, but we're going to at least get it started. So coloring up some of the landscape here, get that looking real nice, and we've got our palm trees, we've got our landscape, and now we're going to get into some buildings. We don't actually start out with a whole lot of options, but we've got a restroom, we've got umbrellas, and we have bubble tea and hot dogs, which is or bubble tea and Chinese food, I believe it is, which is such an odd combination, but nonetheless, that's what we got to work with, so that's what we'll build. So I see this as another one of these sections where we have a couple of different buildings with basically one overall structure and facade. So we're looking at a couple of different Caribbean house type options. So the kind of takeaway here is a lot of kind of clapboard and metal roofs with pastel type colors for walls and things. So we're going to start with that as some options. So we have some yellow here. We're going to roll into some greens, some pinks, some reds. And just kind of make it all look very tropical throughout the whole thing. So I wanted a walkway here, just a nice little overhang up above the walkway into the umbrella stall. And we'll use some different pieces here since we can't put the fence pieces on the half tile without mods. We're going to use some of these cable pieces and then some of these pillars that we can kind of free place wherever we want. So not certainly exactly how we want to go, but it'll do in this sort of instance. Getting our metal roof in here, which is going to see a lot of use throughout between this one and the metal one for the hanger roof. Windows and doors are kind of limited as well in vanilla without any mods. Less so doors as much windows, but the windows are quite limited. But there are some tricks that we'll employ here soon and try a couple of different things. Now, certainly I'm by no means a veteran builder in this game, so what I'm doing is still pretty amateur as far as all that goes. But we are going to use this piece here as a windowsill, which I think worked out pretty well. And getting that pillar just kind of half sunk into the wall, give it some dimension as well. I'm going to hint to the structure a little bit. And then one more ride as we start out. So we'll put a wave swinger right here. So this builds out maybe a third of the space inside, maybe a little bit more. But I think we're going to be fine. We're going to build out the flat space first. If we need it, we can build into the slopes, but I really don't think we will. Once we get into some tracked rides, we'll go ahead and use that hill space to our advantage. But until then, I don't think we really need it. We're going to get a nice little pink pastel building here for our restrooms, and just kind of simple on the side. We'll put a 3D sign on here. And just make it look real simple. Put some vines on this side just to hide the overall building form. Make it kind of disappear a little bit. We've really set up these buildings and this fencing so we kind of nestled in the helix on that coaster, which is fine, and it kind of backs us up and really limits our dead space that we're going to have in the area. Now for the largest building in the kind of front plaza, we'll call it, we have this mint colored building here with a couple of different stalls. So we're going to use the customizable shop so we don't have the various stall shapes kind of poking through those archways. We'll add these pillars with a little bit of a footer underneath of them just to give it a little bit of dimension still. There's the fat pillar here. Now, I like to go 5 high on my floors. This is something that I've kind of carried over from RCT, but unfortunately the vanilla scenery doesn't really like that so much, so you have to kind of overlap some scenery in a couple of spots, and it doesn't always look quite right, but we'll make the best as what we make do as best as we can. And the decking material there is one of the pirate or like porch objects, which works pretty well. Once you zoom in, there's some gaps and things there, but it actually looks themed, which I kind of like, and that's what we want to go with for this spot. So we use the flat roof here, or the smooth roof, just for our point of differentiation from the other metal roofs. There's, really not a whole lot of variety as far as this goes. A thatch roof or something like that would be quite nice, but we really don't have that as an option. So we're going to just stick with this. Put some various pieces in here to kind of show off the shaping there, and then we're going to do a checkerboard on the whole thing. And honestly, the only reason we're going to do the checkerboard is because the one wall showed through, so we wanted to cover that up. So initially we started here with the certain windows, but then we're going to come back with the arched windows and then inlay a piece of glass throughout, so it looks a little more varied than our first building over there. Couple lights, couple posts, and we'll call it a day. It's not super detailed, but it will do the job. So here's our little plaza. Not a whole lot to it, but it's not too bad. What we're going to go back through now is rebuild some of these supports, and this is purely an aesthetic thing, but the game is very fast to take away columns from coasters into more or less unrealistic scenarios where we have huge sections of track floating, but that's something I prefer to put back. So we'll use the basic shapes pieces and take care of that. Now I'll theme up our little corner here with the same sort of motif, and we'll carry this motif all the way through the whole park. Not super inventive, but we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're just making a nice looking landscape throughout the whole thing. So palm trees, that one bush, and some rocks is our pretty standard option here. And with luck, we accidentally put our depot right on top of where the underground piping went to. So amazingly, we were exactly right without paying any attention to that. But we'll cover that whole space, including the training room or the break room, just to give us a little bit of coverage there. We don't have to worry about the negative guest impact, although we are going to put some walls through the whole thing. And we'll put some bushes here, although we will later notice that the swing clips through those, but I never did catch that in time to fix it, so that's an oops. Hopefully those people like branches in their legs. But we're wrapping up our first section here, and really starting to feel pretty alright about it. We've got our good architecture in here. Decoration rating is super, super high in this spot. We're hiring our couple employees that we're going to need for all of those parts and pieces, and then kind of closing in the rest of those buildings front and back. But really, the next thing we need to focus on is our front area here, what we're going to do for the coaster station, and then also what we're going to do for this this kind of front fort area. Like I said earlier, like we looked at, we were checking out some fort options potentially. So this is where we started, is using those balcony or porch pieces, I guess. I think they might be Western actually, rather than, I think I said pirate. I don't think there really is pirate, so more Western than anything. But actually, this is what this is really where I wanted to focus. But the more that I looked at this, it really wasn't fitting. So we'll give this a try in a couple different ways, see what we can do with it. But it's maybe not the best option, and there might be some other things that we can do instead. So we'll continue to build through this whole thing, put some canopies over top, and it's not a bad tower. It's just I don't quite think it's appropriate for this particular theme. I think this is more kind of Wild West Fort versus abandoned island kind of adventure tower. But in the meantime, we do like this little awning over top of the walkway over the bridge. So we'll place these pillars just inset slightly, so not on the corners. So kind of has that, I don't know, more rustic tropical feel to it. Now we're looking at various materials and what works, what doesn't. But figure we'll want to enclose this section of the queue and just try a couple of different things. So we're going to carry the same motifs from the station that we've established so far over here. So we've got that awning for the bridge. We're going to bring that over coming out of this tunnel and see how all that goes. I'm in the process here of completely screwing up the landscape as I try and get these tunnels to work right, which I believe I still end up having some issues from a connectivity standpoint, but we will fix that at some point here later. So the 2x2 tower is awfully chunky in this game, but we'll start with that and we'll give it an overhang, but we're not going to make it too tall, so it's going to kind of feel this like a little squat building, which is not too bad. We will put a roof on it, but we're going to use one of the metal roofs so it matches what we've been doing elsewhere. A little bit of detail throughout, but not a whole heck of a lot. But just matching textures, matching colors, things like that. So in the end, it more or less fits, and when in doubt, put some vines on it. It will screen things pretty well. So we looked at a whitewashed option at one point, but it wasn't really feeling it. So we're gonna stick with the wood, the brown wood look, and masking these tunnels here. So we'll come out between this building and this awning, using some landscape here for some masking. And then we'll try one more building on this side here just to give it a little bit more definition once again. Give this whole thing a little bit of space. And this building works really well for hiding this queue. And we can extend it just a little further. And now we have a queue on both sides of the entrance, so we got some options for when guests first come in. And I'll modify this to a 2x2, so they kind of work together on either side of this entry pathway. Just one's a little offset from the other, and also a little shorter. So I think they complement each other nicely without being symmetrical, because I really kind of wanted to avoid the symmetry at this point. All sorts of boxes, barrels, that sort of thing is an easy theme without doing a whole heck of a lot. You can simplify things pretty well. So for our coaster station here, we're going to go simple, and this is actually going to dictate kind of what we did for the rest of the space in this map. But essentially a wood roof, or not a wood roof, a wood column supporting a metal roof and carrying that through across the whole space. So we are putting these along the edge, and the only reason I'm putting them on the edge is because I really like the trim pieces that we can use there to kind of give it some cross members, some diagonal members, things like that. Updating our fences throughout, putting some ride restricted fencing in there, rebuilding a couple of supports, really just kind of cleaning up the whole area as we shape up this whole plaza space. And you could put landscape down for days and days and days. Really, the landscaping here is very nice, and it gives you a lot of options to work with. But you got to pick when to stop at some point. We're going to get some of these little dormers here. For me, these kind of felt a little Polynesian. I'm not quite sure why. Might have been just the triangle nature of them. But anyway, they look nice, and figured those would be a good option. Even if we don't have a window up in top of them, or up inside of them, I think it'll still work just fine. I'm going to paint all that a little bit darker, a little less shiny than the standard color, which I think works just fine. And we'll drop one more flat ride in here before we get fully open, just to make sure that we've got enough kind of critical mass to get everybody started. One of the challenges that we might run into is that we don't have any rain protected rides just yet. So that's something that I like to have, as at least one of those. But in this case, we don't have any, which may not be a bad thing if it doesn't rain. But once it does, nobody's going to be able to ride stuff. So that's what we want to hopefully avoid. Now over to our mouse. We've done like I said, this is the third instance of this mouse in 5 scenario play parks, but we're going to try and do something different with this one, just kind of 2 little beach house type things with roofs opposing each other. Just something simple to keep it covered and just to increase our scenery rating throughout the whole thing. And the more pieces you put in, the more you're going to get out of it as far as a rating goes. Trying to harken to the beach house, we're going to use a little white picket fence here. A couple of those bulrushes, another nice palm, and of course our trusty plant there that covers a lot of space really well. Doesn't have a hitbox, so we can kind of spam it as much as we want. Nice color parasol umbrellas there. And part 2 of this building on this space. So we're trying to do something a little bit different. So similar texture, but different colors, and a different angle on the roof. And also we want to put a nice little overhang on the front here, so we've got something for guests to walk through as they come in. A little bit of trim here, just kind of cleaning up the whole thing. And our trusty king palm. We use this one probably more than we ought to, just because it is incredibly useful and also very big. So it takes up a fair bit of room, which is kind of nice. Dropping our trusty square fountain in there. I think I've used that in pretty much every scenario since we started, or campaign, I guess, as it's called. Now we'll further screen this back area, kind of knowing what we want to do. You'll notice there's a little gap between the Enterprise and the swing ride, which actually works really well in our favor because we'll be able to build sort of a back or south collection of buildings a little bit later and feed them from the same the same depot area, which works really well. It's efficient and does what we need it to do. Notice we had forgotten to change the train colors, so we'll do that real quick and make that work for us. Here's where I noticed my peep jam, or inability for the peeps to get in. So we'll fix that up. And we're opened up and off and running. So we need to hit 800 guests by the end of year 2, which should be pretty straightforward, although, as we let this thing run for a little while, we'll find that we're approaching the end of the year 1 and we're not close to the 400, or at least we will see that. We're still in January at this point, or February, I guess now. We'll do some building while the park is running. Put in a boat hire on the backside there for some paddle boats. Just give one extra thing for the guests to do as we think through a little bit about what we can do for our options. Put a little buoy back here as some theming. And finally connect this up because we're big enough now that we probably need the loop of path. On a park of this size, we're taking up more than half by now, so we really ought to make it a loop. Dead ends work for you, but only a certain amount of space. So things are moving pretty well right now. We are going to see what we can do as far as kind of extending the park and continuing to expand our whole space. We've got some other options now. We got a top spin if we want it, but starting to think about some tracked rides, knowing that at some point we're going to want the log flume, and then once we get to 400, we will want the looping coaster as well, just to do something different. Here's a layout for this kind of south area for building or buildings. We've got kind of 4 set up at the moment, which we'll actually end up putting this off until almost the very end, just because I kind of had, I guess, better things to do as we continued on through the whole space. So we're just adding some decoration now, just some pretty simple stuff going back through with fencing and getting rid of all the default fencing as we add in our own stuff. I think we might copy that same pavilion idea from that front mint building over to this back area. So we'll copy those in kind of preemptively, although we're actually not going to touch that for a little while longer. But kind of knowing that we do eventually want some rain protection, we're going to drop a carousel in here. Put it on the water because we have some nice kind of waterfront options here to work with. So I said earlier that the coaster station building was going to sort of dictate the rest of the architecture in this map, and maybe unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. It is the case. So we can see here as we build this structure. I actually kind of liked how this one turned out, just with the kind of open truss type structure. It felt tropical enough, kind of open and airy. Now, granted, we have a carousel here, and there is no real requirement to put anything over top of it. We're already weather protected, but seems like just something that you do typically when you have a nice enough carousel. You put it under a cover. So as you can kind of see, as we continue to expand outwards, we're theming it just a little less and less, just because of the kind of nature of um, spending the money that we've got while we're building out. We're really not spending too long with each one of these things, but we will come back and do some buildings and things like that even after we win the scenario. Spoiler. But we are going to do some ad campaigns here just to try and get some guests in. You'll see we're into August already, September now, and we're still not to that 400 goal, so I was not necessarily sweating it out, but I was a little bit antsy to get ourselves over the 400 because I wanted to build that steel coaster and see what we can do to bring in the guests. And with Parkitect especially, it really is based on just big coasters, big thrill rides, things like that that are going to drive the bulkier guests in. So I wanted to see what that larger coaster was going to do for our overall guest count. And while we wait and kind of keep checking that, we're going to go through with more and more of the landscaping and just kind of doing some touch-up where we can. But we are going to go through here, and this is actually where we transition into the next stream. This one we did just after Christmas. And this is the big moment when we buy our next big loan. So we're going to take the gigantic loan here, the $26,000 one, and we're going to build two things. We're going to build the log flume, and we're going to build the coaster. So the log flume is first, just because we don't have the coaster unlocked. So we paused it right now, get this log flume built, and then this will push us over the hill to get us to those 400 guests. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on while building this log flume was diagonals, because we don't have those as an option on RCT. So I thought, well, I might as well try and do something unique with it and try and be at least somewhat different and take advantage of the tools that we have at our disposal. So you have some nice long flowing corners, some little diagonals here, and then we have this second lift, which is also on the diagonal as well. We're going to come up here and culminate in basically one big drop right here at the end, and just trying to make sure that it works out so we can get it right there halfway into the water submerged, and then weave our way back and get it into the station. Here I am learning about the buoys for the first time as our natural water divider for the paddle boats. We don't want any of them coming into our log flume space. And now we're just going to start to build out the area for this this whole thing. So we have our exit path over top of the flume, and then also a nice little viewing area on the drop. Really, I've said it before, but I really like to activate those log flume drops. You really want to put something nice in there and make it work from a visual standpoint. So that's what we did here with that pathway, and make sure that all the guests are going to be able to see it. So at this point, we've kind of explored the extent of our flat space to work with in this area. Still a lot of space to actually plop some stuff down if you want to. You will see once we zoom out a little bit later that we did actually cut off a substantial area with our kids coaster. Thankfully, we never had to use it, but if we did, it was definitely a mistake that I might have ended up revising the coaster for. So we'll do a little bit of a jagged queue there because we'll put some theming into it. Once again, we're going to do our post and metal roof building here. Carry those same bits and pieces across. And certainly there's room to be more creative, but you know, this is one of those in and out scenario sort of things, so we don't want to spend too long on it. This is not meant to be a like piece de resistance type park where we're going to spend forever on one of these things, just making it as best as it can possibly be. So the kind of intention with these scenario builds or campaign builds is really to um, do sort of a stream of consciousness type building where I'm not spending a ton of time on any one particular thing as far as architecture or stations go, but uh, something that looks decently nice is going to get the job done as far as winning the scenario goals and things like that. So um, while I think everything here looks fine, we could probably do a lot better. And hopefully, eventually, we'll get into the campaign or the sandbox mode where we've got mods and custom content and things like that to work with, because there's a lot of different options that we can go with if we really want to go in that direction. So, sprucing up the station area, we got our Q theming in there. Theming meaning just some more palm trees and gardens and rocks, but that's all right. Same thing with those flowers there on the front and the topiary, just make it work real well. Um, and we have some extra money, so we're just going to run those ads as we continue on. But really, this should kind of push us over the top as far as um, attendance goes and gets us to those 400 tickets. So as we kind of manage the park and see how everything's going, we see that we're not too far off now as far as all of that goes. We are going to continue to run some of the campaigns because I haven't really taken advantage of those prior, but they can be pretty useful for the overall process of the park build. So we've got our steel coaster here, and now it's a matter of trying to figure out what we want to do with it. Now the steel coaster in this game is modeled after the Schwarzkopf looping coaster, but it's kind of set sort of as an ambiguous looping coaster. So there's a lot of variety that you could do with it. One of those things is LSM launches, in addition to the lift hill, and all sorts of inversions. So while we start with a lift hill, we're gonna give this a couple of tries. We're actually gonna end up doing this as a launch and trying to see what we can do for this whole thing. So start out with a nice little holding break here, and then we're gonna do a launch. And we're discovering now that we can do the launches on hills, which is cool. So we're going to make this camelback into a launch, or the launch into a camelback, I guess, and immediately go up the mountainside and roll into a zero-G roll. I thought that would be kind of an interesting start to a coaster. Kind of reminds me of almost like Icon at Blackpool. We're not going to go too long with this, but we are going to explore some different options initially. So I haven't really played with the more kind of extreme coasters in the coaster builder just yet. We've basically been using kids coasters and wooden so far, where there's not a whole ton of options. But now that we have various inversions and things like that, it warrants playing around with a little bit. So looking here, we're trying to see if we can do a pretzel loop to fit into the space, and trying a couple different options here, none of which really met the clearances quite right, and I didn't want this huge tunnel throughout, so in the end we said, well, maybe that's not the best option, but a dive loop could work. So we'll start there, and then go back up onto the mountain, and then back into the park proper. So now it's just a matter of trying to figure out what way is best to kind of work this whole space and make this ride fit. And I just got finished saying that this is sort of a stream of consciousness type building, but I have a very hard time doing that with coasters. I like to have a plan in my head about how the ride layout wants to sit and things like that. So it was a little bit challenging to do this when I didn't really have an idea in my head about what I wanted to do. And kind of as we're getting to this point, I'm sort of realizing that it's meandering around. I don't really know how I'm going to finish it from over here behind this kids coaster all the way back to the station, and wondering if it's going to have enough speed. Am I taking all right corners? What all those details are. So I want to think through that and figure out if this is really what I want to do. And ultimately, we said no. There's better options, but it doesn't have to be very long at all. So we're going to back it up here in just a second, back to this point. So I thought, in hindsight, as I typically build rides, one of the best things you can do is interact the coaster with itself. So we're going to do a nice little helix up and over top of this first climb into that roll, and then come back down and try and use this open space here to our advantage. So we'll come around with this other helix here, and then also I wanted to put one more inversion in here if we could. So we'll do this, this corkscrew up and over top of the drop as it comes down. And then we have one more crossing here and into the brakes, which again, loving the fact that we can do inclined brakes. So we'll do that and put it into the finishing point here. So not a super long coaster and not a super flowing coaster, but I'm actually reasonably happy with this layout. I think it's generally fine. So now we're just in the process of trying to sort out our actual station building here and our queue, which we will modify this queue a little bit later as we look at a transfer track option, of which we're going to do one here and do a little transfer building, but we're not going to do one on the Junior Coaster or the Wild Mouse. I think we've seen how those would go before, but I figured in this instance I was just gonna not, so that's okay. Made the decision to open this initially in a rainstorm, which is probably a poor decision because we're going to limit our guests. But thankfully the rain's cleared up after a little while, and guests are willing to pay an obscene amount for this ride. I think it was like $15. So I'll take that. If that's really what the guests want to pay, then go for it. I'm going to drop in our transfer track right here as well, just so that we have it. We'll move the guest path around, and then the only thing that'll have to move later is the queue. I did have some excess cash after all of that for the flume in the coaster, so I will start paying back that loan. The thing that scared me about the loan was the size of the payback of the interest, and I really didn't want to get into a situation where we couldn't make those monthly payments because we weren't able to keep it in the green. So that's why I started to repay as soon as I could. We're gonna have some color options here, just trying a couple different things. We ended up with this sort of yellow track and kind of burgundy red supports, which I think look all right. Kind of brighten in your face. So we're just now into year 2, and we're doing pretty all right as far as attendance goes. We're into the high 500s, which at some point we're going to get into the 600s here and really continue on to do what we need to do. For this one, I changed it up a little bit and used the curve piece. It kind of felt more Polynesian to me. Didn't necessarily reflect that super well in the rest of the architecture, but I thought it worked okay. We are going to inset these column pieces and double them up, so we've got this this kind of look here. But I figured that at some point the thinner ones looked a little bit better at that volume. At the volume that we're building, it was maybe a little too thick, perhaps. A little bit too dense. So we'll continue the small columns all around. Do 3 here on the corners, and then also use a larger one here as a little bit of a footer at that station elevation level, which I think works okay. So it turns out we're making pretty good buck at this point, especially with the coaster coming in and the log flume charging what we're charging, so we can continue to pay back our loan while expanding still. This is actually going to be the last ride that we're going to add into the park. This is a teacups ride, and just thought we would put one more kind of different kind of ride in here with this gentle ride. and we will put a cover on that eventually, so we'll have another rain protected ride, so that'll give us 2 overall between the carousel and the teacups, which isn't a lot, but it'll get the job done. We're wrapping up the station columns right now. I'm not trying to get too fancy with it, but just making it look good still. At this point, the intention was still to build out the kind of South Market area that we had marked out earlier, but not a whole lot of extra anything. But that changes here as we'll build a little gift shop exit for this ride and toilet building. We're realizing right around now that the only toilet building is right there up at the front, and this is a pretty substantial park for having only one toilet. So we're going to correct that and make sure that it looks right. But first things first is just building a covering over top of this teacups ride. So trying to keep these different each time. It's very easy to do the in this instance the kind of 5x5 just pinnacle roof on the one side and up and over, and that's it. But I wanted to try and keep doing a little bit different here, so we're going to take that motif from the coaster station with the double columns, carry that through the whole space, and do this kind of square roof with the corners chamfered on, and then this different peak at the top. And really the only reason we're doing that peak at the top is so that you can actually see into the space and see what kind of ride's going on in there, so you don't just hide the whole thing underneath of a couple pieces of scenery. The only downside with these pieces of column right now is that they actually block the entrance and the exit and the queue. So maybe next time if we did that, we'd think through a little better where we put the queue or the entrance and exit pieces, just to so it makes a little more sense. Keeping that trick with the larger columns there and the smaller columns on top, or pillars, I suppose. And then enclosing the space up here, putting some of these trim pieces on. This gives it that kind of nice air of finishedness. And there was the confetti. So that was the 800 guests that we needed, and we kept our park rating above 70% pretty much from the get-go. So we are done as far as the scenario goes, but there's still a little bit more to do as far as architecture and just final touch-up of this park. Trying a couple different options here for colors and seeing what works for the actual station building here. I think we did stick with the yellow, which is a little bright, but that'll work just fine. So we're looking to see if we can do any other rides in here, and certainly we can if we really wanted to, but I figured at this point the best option was to call it as far as that goes and really just fill us out as far as the pathway layout and the eateries and shops and things like that go. So we're going to make all these paths double wide. We're going to add some plazas in here and just get through with our fencing and our landscape throughout, just to wrap it up. So we have our toilets building just kind of plonked down there right now, but as we can see, we're marking out for a couple options here, which will move that toilet building over into the white sand 2x2 space there. But first, we want to build out this this kind of thing, which turns out is going to be considered as a gift shop. So trying to think through what the best way to do this is as far as the building form goes. You never really want to do too many full straight rectangles, so in this case we're doing this 2x2 with, or 3x2 I guess, with a little piece there on the end. The overhang goes over the main path there, but we will extend that main path a little bit just to give it a little more growth. We'll work in the employee path there and screen that with the hedges so we don't get the negative bonus on that one. And by moving that toilet building, we ended up being able to take all the way right up to the waterfront, which I think that was the right move here, is to utilize the whole waterfront for all of our space. And I think we would say that we did that between the rides and the pathways throughout, and just placing some of those benches so the guys can actually look out onto the water. It's not exactly a big body of water, but it'll do. So we get this trimmed out. Again, pretty simple structure, not a whole lot going on here. Just kind of wood form. We're going to steal the yellow from the front gate and add that back in for our restroom building over here as well. We realized we had a wall there, and all the peeps from the coaster station were blocked and couldn't get out, so that was unfortunate situation for them. We have a nice simple yellow structure here. We are going to toss in some umbrellas in there. Also didn't realize you can charge as much for umbrellas as we could, which is sort of news to me and also seems like a ripoff, but what do I know? So I'll take it, and if the guests are going to pay it, then absolutely, why not? Trusty old vines do a nice job decorating up the side of the building just to give it something there. It doesn't look too kind of stark. I wasn't a huge fan of the one wide path through here, but it was kind of the only way to get this to work right in that space. Toss in barrels here because, of course, barrels and crates are sort of the epitome of log flume type theming, so that's where we wanted to stick with and do what we could. So now we're into the home stretch here as we go through and build out this section of buildings. This is sort of our last section of doing kind of detailed buildings, except for some stuff we'll do at the coaster here in a little bit. So sticking with those pastel colors, we're going to go pretty obnoxious pink here, sort of Pepto-Bismol pink. And just trying to be unique with the shaping. We're going to inset those columns. We're going to put the trellis up top. So we still have the 2x2 roof, but we got a little bit more interesting shape for the rest of it. Here we had our first belt of vandals, which I have aired my frustrations on these in previous streams, so I won't rehash it, but we'll spend a little bit of time going through here and banning people as we see fit, but we're not going to get all of them, so we'll have to go back and do that a little bit later, which actually I will do some of that off stream, so we don't have to sit through it and watch me search around and zoom to different areas to try and find these guys. Thankfully the park isn't huge, so I'm not super worried about it. So another building here on the side, just to kind of create that L shape worth of buildings, whether it's a kind of proud L or an elbow of an L for where your pathway sits. Either one works. It's a nice arrangement for structures, I would say. Trying to find like a door or something that'll sit inside this window frame and kind of look like a nice window. So giving it a bunch of different options, but in the end we're going to just settle with the standard window. But if we back it up enough, then it'll at least look like it's inset in some way. So that's fine. I don't mind. So you put up this red building, and then immediately I kind of regretted doing it. So we're gonna end up taking that one down. Reason being is it just seemed like there were so many of these buildings right next to each other, and all of them were relatively small. So what we're gonna do actually is go through and expand out the pink building just a little bit, give it a second section, and that'll at least give us um, a larger space here without having too much chaos as far as different structures goes. We don't want too many different, and although this is sort of a Main Street USA sort of thing as far as Magic Kingdom goes, not all buildings are just connected like this in theme parks. So a lot of them are standalone, but in this case, it's just easier for us to connect them all together and do the Disney style of things where you can kind of imagine being able to walk through all the buildings on the inside, just like it's one big building. But that was just fine, so that's how it'll work. Here's our little expander section here, just uh, give us a little variety in architecture. Only one story this time. So this window boxes have the flowers, and then of course our trusty uh, partial sand with rock, with plant, with palm trees. All those work just fine, probably a little too well. And our final building here, going back to that uh, steel roof piece that we've used 100 times so far. It's just very versatile for pretty much any kind of theme. So that's why we're going to stick with it. Little flat roof section here. And you can see how well the employee area kind of sits throughout the space and kind of goes through this narrow area. And for a very, very short employee walkway, we have a lot of coverage, I would suggest. So I'm pretty pleased with that. And I think that's a good model to look at, is how to connect multiple like shopping, dining type districts with one depot, one training room, things like that, or staff break area, so you don't have too much walking that they've got to do, and you can still get it all back of house, so they can stock all those different shops without ever having to talk to a guest, which is going to be way more efficient overall. Coming back through here, we're going to go in and landscape everything, just filling out these kind of blank planter spaces. We've got a lot of different planters throughout this whole area, so palm trees are coming in handy. Definitely becoming a uh, useful piece of equipment. And then lastly, we want to build out this station for building for the maintenance bay, um, making it a little bit asymmetrical. We don't just want to make it one by however long the transfer track is. We want something else to it, part storage, whatever else you may have in there. Um, and we're going to do that on the one side here with the 3 tiles additions, or addition 2. And then also building our little sliding transfer table, which works just fine until you realize the queue goes through here and isn't quite what we're looking for. So we are going to reroute that just a little bit so it fits through there and call it a day. We don't need anything fancier, it just works as far as this goes. So coming through here, trying to bury this tree just to see what it looked like. Not too bad, and something we'll definitely employ in future streams perhaps, but for now it was more of a proof of concept than anything. Trying a different kind of plant, and of course our same king palm that is our trusty landscape sidekick here. Last, we want to expand out this section so we have our single wide path underneath the coaster, but it really doesn't make sense. It needs to be a double wide path because that's really how the guests kind of see this whole space, and that's where we want to stick with it. But as we wrap up with these couple of columns here and fencing and some landscape, really we are wrapping up as far as the overall space goes. So here we are, back in real time, and we're going to take a quick tour around our park. So we've got our swinging ship, which we started with there over top of the water, has all the nice little theming pieces, and works just fine in that regard. We got our kids coaster here as well. Um, Reasonably, I wouldn't say a short layout, maybe more medium sized, but we did cut off that whole flat space up top there, which was a mistake. Something we should pay better attention to next time. But it works just fine, and we didn't need to fill it, so that's totally okay. Two trains are going pretty well, and actually we finally got a fair amount of people to fill one of those trains because we were struggling for that the whole time. I do like these buildings. I thought they worked pretty well. Not super highly detailed. We do have all the stalls in there filled up pretty well, but works just fine. Have our wave swinger here with the clipping through the trees, which is an oops there. The Enterprise on that side, which really never did theme. Our Wild Mouse, which is doing pretty well, pretty popular, working nicely there. And our second row of buildings back here, which not a whole lot, but again, same kind of vibe as the front, which is just fine. Carousel under this cover. I actually kind of like the way this sits on the water. I think it looks pretty nice for the whole thing. Those two buildings there, the coaster gift shop, I guess, and the restroom building were a little unexpected. Didn't plan to build those, but kind of made sense in the end. Then the log flume, certainly our first kind of big track ride that we did outside of the coaster, so looks well enough, and seems like people are riding it, even if the queue isn't totally full. So that's not too bad. But then our coaster here, which I did name Surfs Up, which is kind of harkening back to one of the recent Fix My Coaster layout episodes that we did. Seemed appropriate. We have the roll and another dive loop right here. Going up and over the mountain, a little bit of floater airtime there, I would think. Tying around the initial climb, which that really kind of saved the layout for me as far as just trying to figure out where I was going and what I was doing with it. So I will take it as far as that goes. And then into the brakes. And the nice thing is we got our holding brake on the other side. So that one is just pulling onto the holding brake as the other train comes into the station. So you're not sitting there for so long. But there's our park, and hope you enjoyed it. We will catch you in the next one. We have two different options for the next go around. So we'll pick one and build to it. But until next time, thank you all very much for watching. Have a great day, and we will catch you in the next one. Bye now.